Facile formulas, catchy slogans, 10-step programs, and quick fixes too often dominate today's management training programs. But in organizations, as in all of life, human behavior is seldom predictable, and business dilemmas do not easily lend themselves to gimmicks or simplistic answers. In Management of the Absurd, psychologist, educator, and former CEO Richard Farson presents a series of management paradoxes designed to challenge conventional wisdom and encourage managers to re examine their assumptions about effective leadership. Good morning. This is Thursday, the 23rd of November. It is Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Welcome to Story Time. Today, Chapter 32, Lost Causes Are the Only Ones Worth Fighting For. In a famous Frank Capra movie from the 30s, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, James Stewart plays a young man just elected to the U.S. Senate. Before leaving for Washington, he is encouraged by his father, who offers this paradoxical advice: lost causes are the only ones worth fighting for. That absurd line has stuck in my mind all these years, and I think that only now am I beginning to understand its meaning. Lost causes are the ones most worth fighting for because they tend to be the most important, most humane ones. They require us to live up to the best that is in us, to perfect ourselves and our world. Lost causes cannot be won, but because they are so crucial to us, we nevertheless must try. On several occasions while consulting with organizations, I have asked groups if they could identify lost causes in their work, goals that we're pretty sure they could not reach. Each time, I was surprised to find out how easy it was to elicit a response, and how enjoyable the process was. Instead of being depressed or discouraged by recalling intractable problems or stubborn associates, or out-of-reach objectives that had so frustrated them, the group members seemed relieved, even exhilarated. Often they would break up in laughter as together they recognized for the first time the absurdity of efforts that had absorbed so much of their time. An even bigger surprise for me, however, was that identifying these lost causes did not necessarily lead to their abandonment. Instead, the members of the group simply shared the realistic appraisal that their expectations could not be met and then set about to work on them anyway. They did this, of course, because, impossible as they seemed, these were tasks that meant the most to them. Increasingly, I am guided in my own work as a consultant by the advice, when I can remember to give it to myself, that I should give up before I start. Whenever I have the arrogance or audacity to believe that I can reform people, I get nowhere. But when I fundamentally recognize that I cannot possibly accomplish those reforms, I can move ahead with a more humble posture, and, paradoxically, perhaps then there is a chance that the situation can change. The absurd lesson is to recognize that it is a lost cause and work on it anyway. Valley of the Absurd. A senior scientist at a well-known university agricultural research laboratory once described to me how he comes to grips with absurdity. The people in his organization sell ideas to industry and government, and it is his task to see if the ideas will work. Not surprisingly, they often strike him as absurd, growing plants in seawater, greening the deserts, and the like. Instead of throwing up his hands, however, he goes ahead as if each were possible. He copes with the feeling that the idea is absurd and yet acts anyway. In his own words, as if he descends into it, it is as if he descends into a deep valley, the valley of the absurd, he calls it, until he reaches the peaceful security of the valley floor. There he can move about effectively. When it is time to leave, he climbs back up, returning to his regular life, ready to work on what he had earlier regarded as absurd. In that metaphor, it seems to me that he captures the essence of coping with absurdity. To dramatize it a bit, I would say that he has 1. Allowed the enormity of the situation to wash over him in all its irrationality. 2. Embraced the absurdity even though he could not fully comprehend it. And 3. Fallen prostrate before its overwhelming complexity, giving up before he starts. And 4. Then calling upon the deep reservoir of will, discipline, experience, creativity, and even playfulness that lies within. He picked himself up and started anyway, still respectful in one corner of his mind of the fundamental absurdity that he recognized. Leaving rake marks. If absurdity is ubiquitous, if the most important goals are lost causes, why do we keep playing this absurd game? We play it because it is the only game in town. Of course it is absurd, of course it is only a game, but it is a game well worth playing and worth playing well. I was once consulting with a large government organization that manages parks. The men who had the job of cleaning campgrounds were complaining to me that they not only had to pick up under the picnic tables, which they were quite willing to do, but were told to rake under the tables as well. I wasn't quite sure what they meant by that, so I asked, "You mean that after the area is all picked up, your supervisors want you to leave rake marks under the tables?" They answered, "Yeah, that's it. They want us to leave rake marks." I was just about to agree that it was perhaps an absurd request when I stopped and thought to myself, I'll bet the people who do that job leave rake marks. Now, what could be less important than leaving rake marks? But then again, what could be more important than leaving rake marks? Leaving rake marks has since become an important metaphor for me. It has to do with going beyond the necessary to the desirable, beyond what is required to what is elegant, beyond the purely functional to the aesthetic. Management may be a lost cause, impossible, absurd, but I know that I want very much to play that game with the best of them. I care very much about doing it right, even though I know that in the most important aspects there is no way to be sure what right is. So maybe it is key for all leaders and managers to fight for lost causes, and at the same time keep doing the unimportant tasks well, leaving rake marks as it were. Maybe we all can indeed learn from the cleanup man. For while he cannot directly affect the picnickers by leaving rake marks, somehow, by doing this unimportant task well, he may, in some indirect way, help them to be better, happier people. Maybe he even helps himself. And that is the end of chapter 32. And coming up on Saturday, which will be the 25th, is chapter 33, the final chapter of this book. And it's entitled, My Advice Is, Don't Take My Advice. And again, that'll be on Saturday the 25th. And until then, thank you for, I will be making comments and whatnot on my blog at www.ronaldhardgrove.blogspot.com. So until Saturday, thank you for joining me and have a great day.